It's been 10 years now since Bitcoin was first issued, and the digital currency marketplace has evolved and grown. I think one of you said 2,200 currencies right now, cryptocurrencies right now. Given this innovation and their complexity, it can be difficult to understand the differences between products and their benefits and the challenges that are raised for regulatory climate. Mr. Allaire, how can the U.S. develop a more comprehensive approach to digital currency and blockchain regulation while still acknowledging the unique aspects of different projects?
Thank you, Senator. I think your comment is very accurate in that we have seen tremendous development over that period of time. As noted in my testimony, there's over 2,300 different digital assets that are available publicly in some form. In my testimony, I do outline in great detail the kind of different categories of digital assets. It's very easy when one hears about Bitcoin or Libra to sort of assume this is all the same stuff. And so I think one of the very first things for regulators and policymakers is to really distinguish between the different types of digital assets that are emerging. We see, obviously, these kind of non-sovereign digital monies like Bitcoin. There are dozens of others like that that have a focus on kind of privacy-preserving, transmission of value. They implicitly have a kind of monetary policy associated with them. And these kind of new commodity monies need to be regulated as we've regulated other commodity monies with appropriate types of financial crimes controls, as we've seen put forward in with FinCEN and FATF guidance. But also there's, I think, new things that happen in this space. The firms that store these assets, these are effectively digital bearer instruments. So not unlike diamonds or gold or some other bearer instrument, but they're digital, which makes them very, very attractive to people who might want to steal them. Hence, so much of there's been so much activity around theft on these kinds of cryptographically secured assets. And so regulations around the custody of digital assets is a really critical need, and something that a number of jurisdictions have actually put forward and built very specific rules around how do we custody these types of digital assets. I think, as I've also talked about, some of the most innovative technology in this field are what I call blockchain platforms. And these are really general purpose infrastructures for record keeping, transaction processing, writing code that executes different types of contracts. And this is, I think, one of the most important breakthroughs that we've seen frankly, in the history of modern computing. And ultimately can lead to things like secure voting, new forms of governance mechanisms within firms, as well as innovations in financial assets. These types of assets, I think, have the broadest applicability and should be encouraged in their development, I think, in the same way that we encouraged the rapid development of technical standards that made the commercial internet flourish.
Let me interrupt and ask a further question. As I understand it, when it's been recently that Poloniex, the subsidiary of Circle, transferred its registration to Bermuda, and cited in that process, it was cited that there was regulatory uncertainty in the United States, which was a primary motivating factor. Could you explain that a little better?
Yes, absolutely. I think the really critical issue is that many of these digital assets do not easily fit classifications that we've had in our financial system. We'd like to say, oh, this is like a currency, or this is like a commodity that you'd use or utilize in some way, or this has some feature that maybe makes it look like an investment contract. Many digital assets have features of all three. It's what makes digital assets, I think, very innovative, is that you can construct an asset that simultaneously incentivizes capital, incentivizes customer behavior, provides value in terms of access to goods or services and payments. And that's a breakthrough in how we can develop corporate forms. It's a breakthrough in how we can incentivize and develop businesses and technologies. Unfortunately, in the United States, the guidance that the SEC has given is extremely, let's just say, narrow in terms of what they would deem to not be a security. The vast majority of digital assets, if they were in fact treated as securities, as the Howey test application and the most recent staff guidance provides, Effectively, we would mean that those are not accessible to U.S. persons because the utility value of the asset would not be possible to function if it's treated as a security. So there's a fundamental mismatch between the regulatory structure and guidance that we have here and the nature of these digital assets. And so markets around the world are adopting these, and not just Bermuda, but Singapore, Switzerland, even jurisdictions like France introducing tailor-purposed definitions of digital assets so that issuers can feel comfortable with their obligations. There's investor protections associated with those and security and the like, but which don't try and jam these into the respective classifications we have today.
So my time's expired, but to be sure I understand your point here, it would be, as a part of our policy approach, you're suggesting we should not regulate this set of innovations as securities.
To the contrary,
should.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. Yes, we should regulate these. I believe we need new definitions of digital assets as a new asset class, and that there are circumstances where there are investor protection considerations, there are trading and market considerations, there are also circumstances that have to do with utility, commodity, and end-user usage, and you have to be able to define these in a way where that can work.
All right, thank you. Senator Brown.
Thank you. And Ranking Member Brown for this important discussion, and thank you all for being here. Let me follow up on that, and let me start with you, Mr. Allaire. I do think that blockchain technology, there's potential for it. It is the future. It's a platform that has the ability to transform so many sectors of this country, from what we are talking right now, the financial sector, to the energy sector, right, to healthcare records, to everything. I think there's potential here. And it's not going to go away. It is something we have to address, because if we as a country do not lead in this technology, China or some other country is going to do so. So, Mr. Allaire, let me talk to you about this, because you talked about defining digital assets. When you're talking about that, are you only talking about it as it pertains to the financial sector, or are you looking at other potential areas where blockchain can be used in our economy?
So, thank you, Senator. These in my written testimony, I talk about this category of digital assets, which are often called, tokens or tokenized digital assets.
So that's just as it refers to cryptocurrency, some sort of currency?
It is not necessarily. So
Okay.
you may have a token that represents votes. You may have tokens that are associated with healthcare records, as you said. The breakthrough here is that we have a public, secure, tamper-proof infrastructure that's evolving and emerging for record keeping and processing of data that is more resilient and ultimately more private than some of the infrastructures that we have today. And that can be applied in many industries in many significant ways. A lot of the innovations that are happening with these digital assets that are built on blockchains may have some fundamental utility within an industry, a business, a product, a service. But that digital asset also may be associated with some financial characteristic. And the coupling of the utility and financial characteristics is part of what makes these innovative. And it's the definitions there that I think really need to be more clearly defined in the United States in particular, in order for businesses who want to build on this to be able to innovate and issue new types of digital tokens that can be applied very, very broadly in many, many industries.
Thank you.
So here's the thing. It sounds like you think this will democratize the use of financial products. But I'm sort of stuck on what she said and tend to agree with what she said, which is to say that there is a much more straightforward way to do that. There are public policy proposals all the time. There are things that our regulators could do under existing statute to democratize the process and to decentralize the process. And so what I'm trying to get at is, do you really think that in a society in which only 81% of the public currently has a smartphone, that we're anywhere close to democratizing the use of these products? I mean, what it sounds like to me is tech people wanting to wave a wand and skip a bunch of steps and avoid the tough politics of doing things for people and saying, we've got a new tech that will solve all this stuff. So I'm just wondering whether you want to speak to the limitations societally of what you're doing. I don't doubt the importance of the technology or that we'll probably all be using it in 2 decades. But I think that that's a different assertion than, oh, and by the way, it's going to solve all these other societal ills. Go ahead.
Well, first, I think the motivations for founding this company in particular circle, and I think a lot of the entrepreneurs, computer scientists, economists, cryptographers, and others that work in this field is not focused on financial wizardry and how to, get rich quick. There is certainly a fair share of that. It's focused on how do we build a new global infrastructure for economic activity.
Okay, but what do you do about, like, just as a start, 19% of the American public doesn't have access to the device that you would use to execute a transaction. And what do you do about the fact that adoption is nowhere near universal? Are we just sort of supposed to place our bet on this tech as solving a bunch of problems and leaping over all the existing ones?
No, I don't think so at all. I think, first of all, these technologies develop over time. In 1998, the internet existed, but no one had broadband access. The internet, personal computers were relatively new in terms of their adoption. Should we not have focused on innovating and building the cloud infrastructure, higher speed internet connections, come up with policies that encourage broadband adoption? Should we not have made those investments and policy choices?
No, but let me, so since you're asking a question, let me answer the question. The important thing here is to understand what this tech does and what it doesn't do. Because if we're going to establish a regulatory framework for this tech, we need to not be so triumphant about all the problems that it's going to solve, but we also have to be clear-eyed about the problems it may create, but also the potential for it. And so when tech executives and their funders talk as though all of societal ills will be solved by a new code, you will forgive us if we're a little bit skeptical about all of that. I don't doubt the potential for this tech. I just don't think it's actually going to bank low-income communities, and I don't think you've persuaded anybody here that it's going to do so.
So there is no silver bullet from technology, very clearly. These are human issues, and they're real policy issues. I think the risks that we have to address in the financial system, whether it's access, criminal abuse, data security, privacy, those exist significantly. This technology actually does provide an avenue to improve upon those, but there's no silver bullet here. This is people who have to build and innovate and collaborate with policymakers.
And I'll take the professor's answer for the record, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
And again, if you're talking not millions or billions, but hundreds of billions or trillions potentially, Mr. Allaire, do you think that really is what Marcus meant, that there would be a literal one-to-one?
Yes, thank you, Senator. My understanding is that, yes, it is a one-to-one based on a mixture of reserve currencies that they would ultimately specify. I would like to comment on this particular topic. I think it's critical, which is, the first wave of these private monies, like Bitcoin, decentralized private monies, were very much focused on establishing a global digital currency with a very specific monetary policy ideology. And those will continue to grow and very likely flourish to the degree that people are interested in pursuing that form of store of value. However, the critical mainstream use cases for the financial services sector built on blockchains has really required the development of what we refer to and the industry refers to as these stable value tokens or stable coins, Libra being an example of that. But these have been around for a number of years. And 2 years ago, with one of the other leading companies in the industry, Coinbase, we created a consortium to develop an open standard for stable value currencies to work on blockchains. And we launched in Q4 of last year the US dollar coin, which is not a basket, it's US dollar coin, and it's a one-for-one backing model as well.
I still don't understand how you fully aggregate that one-to-one backing, but I want to get to a couple more questions quickly. One is, if the Libra approach has got a basket of currencies, don't you have currency risk there? And if you've got currency risk, shouldn't there be, again, some additional, at least, information in terms of consumer protections?
Absolutely. I mean, there's currency risk, and there's also the same risk that the shadow banking market created, right? So the commercial paper markets and the repo markets and the money markets, these were all dollar-denominated currencies. They weren't new currencies, but there was new money and value creation in a different format. And this is exactly what we have here. And not to say that this, they wouldn't have 100% reserves, just to say that what's the point, right? We have U.S. dollars. If we want more of them, the Fed could do that.
It also seems to me a little bit, if you have 100% reserves, where's Libra going to make money on this if you've got if you've got that maintenance of that backstop all the time? Mr. Allaire, I got only a few seconds left. I mean, I'm open on this question around tokens vis-a-vis securities. You've said there ought to be a new framework, a new structure. Where would you put the regulatory authority in the United States if you were to be able to wave that magic wand?
Sure. My recommendation would be the development of a national policy on digital assets, definitions of digital assets, specific rules and exemptions around those, and have a single supervisor over the firms that are regulated.
But I know that's easy to say that, but you didn't answer my question. Would you create a whole new regulatory system for digital assets? Or are you going to pick, and I've run out of time, the chairman's giving me a second. Where would you place this within our existing regulatory structure, or would you create something brand new?
It's a very good question, Senator. I am certainly not an expert on the efficacies of the different regulatory agencies, financial regulatory agencies, and how to best organize those.
Thank you. I do think that the question about why there's not been a breakout beyond digital currency is something that I'd love to get an answer to as well. Thank you.
We, it was very clear to us that for our non-U.S. Business, the U.S. regulations are the U.S. regulations, and what we do here is exactly what the law stipulates. But outside the U.S., there are opportunities for digital assets and blockchains that are larger, and so we spent time to look at all the different jurisdictions, and the things that we were focused on as a firm were, we wanted there to be an actual high bar from a regulatory perspective, meaning that there needed to be significant, serious firms where fundamental risks were being supervised, enterprise risks, cybersecurity risk, financial crime risk, anti-money laundering risk, and most critically, in the case of digital assets, custody risk, the protection of these assets from theft, having the appropriate insurance around them, but also clear definitions. And I think this gets to what one of the other panelists has said, and I've said as well, which is very clear definitions about what constitutes a token or a digital asset to provide that kind of clarity to businesses that want to operate there. Whereas I think in some other jurisdictions, including the United States, there's an incredible gray area. It makes it very difficult for businesses to know where they stand and where to operate. So those are some of the things that we considered and have found in other jurisdictions.
So I want to get into data privacy, and I may have to do that after Senator Brown takes another round. But in the last couple of minutes that I have here, help me understand if a digital currency is to become global, like Libra seeks to do, how does it do that? How does it get global acceptance if it faces 190 different countries with different jurisdictional issues and different regulatory systems? And maybe another way to ask my question is, if the United States were to decide, and I'm not saying that it should, but if the United States were to decide we didn't want cryptocurrency to happen in the United States and tried to ban it, I'm pretty confident we couldn't succeed in doing that because this is a global innovation. But how would a company that wants to create a cryptocurrency that has global reach get into the United States, or how would that impact the United States? You see the question I'm asking?
I'm happy to take part of that, Senator. I think the challenge that we all face with this is, some of these cryptocurrencies they're literally just a piece of open source software. There's nothing else. It exists on the internet. It's open source software. Anyone can implement it. It runs anywhere the internet runs. and these have a monetary policy where these assets are algorithmically generated, and they exist everywhere the internet exists. They will soon exist, interstellar. They will exist, again, anywhere the internet exists. That is a challenge that every government in the world now faces, that money, digital money, will move frictionlessly everywhere in the world at the speed of the internet, hopefully with a high level of security and data protection around it. One of the promises of this technology, very specifically, is a higher standard around privacy, a higher standard around confidential transactions and data protection. That's one of the core infrastructure focuses of these blockchains. And so I think those needs can be met. There's the flip side, which is how does law enforcement get its job done, and how do 190 countries get an agreement about that? FATF guidelines, for example, that are specific to virtual assets have come into place, which I think could be a roadmap to that as well.